myself. Make sure he stays in the commission right now.
I think this spot's just still going.
Right. Anybody else got anything?
Yeah, take it off.
I take off the baptism. I don't want to.
I love the children, they're just over there.
It's like,
Come on.
Why are they doing that? Are they like tap dancing?
They're just excited because I think there's fruit in there. And they're
They
like,
have
"Ooh,
real,
look,
like,
it's fruit."
grape bunches, I think maybe she's teaching one about like the word supper or something.
Oh.
Yeah, I think
Is that
they're.
a kindergarten pastor?
Oh, right here in the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They don't use that room that much during Sunday morning, so I was gonna have to threw me off. I was like,
Yeah.
Anybody else got anything?
I'm waiting for an update on this. But I don't know if we should keep him on there. We all know that he's got the thing. And sure if we do. Did y'all see Rhett? Is he here today? We have to update on this.
I haven't seen it.
You said that
You
he had
go.
to retire.
Mhm.
Retire, like early retirement.
That's true.
Put recovery on there for him, because he already had the surgery. I didn't see them this morning, they may not be.
Mary, did you have your cousin on here?
Yes, she's still, I mean, she's got stage 4 cancer, so she's still needs.
She's not gonna be taken off.
Yeah,
I haven't heard an update on Eamon's dad.
Oh,
yeah, I haven't heard anything.
I've seen posts every so often. I think he still might be in the hospital. You know, 100% sure of that?
Yeah, he was in ICU, remember?
Yeah.
Ventilator.
Yeah, but I don't know if they taken him out of ICU or not.
As far, 3 days ago, no, they have not extubated him yet.
Okay.
I think he's still intubated. She hadn't updated that, so I'm assuming he's still intubated.
Right. Okie So, go to, Dr. Ryan, can you lead us in opening prayer?
Dear God, thank you for this day that you've given us, this opportunity that we have to come together and study your word and worship you and learn more about you and encourage each other. Please be with those who we have mentioned on the prayer list, those who are sick, that are recovering from surgery or have upcoming surgery, those who have lost loved ones, those who are traveling, those who are entering the mission field. Please be with us as we go through this class today and help us to learn more about you. Be with Brandon as he leads us through his source and in Jesus' name.
So, I don't know, look, Christian, we did put your work. So we're entering 2 Corinthians. We just wrapped up our marriage class. It was fun and it's done. And now it's back. Hey, David. Now it's back. So we did take a little break from our study of the Corinthians. So where did we end off? Do you remember where we ended off? In
1 Corinthians 13?
Yeah, but what was going on there? What's Paul? Paul was basically like giving the Corinthians like a heads up, like, oh, I'm gonna come visit y'all again. Don't worry, I'm gonna try my best to make it. And one of the things I wanted to look at is, if possible, is the geographical location of the Corinthians, of where it's at.
Corinth,
Sorry.
I was just telling you where it's at.
Where is it?
Rome.
In
Roman
Corinth.
Empire.
Good. So, we didn't really look at the place last time. So this is where Corinth is. It's kind of right here in this weird little neck part that connects Peloponnese and to the mainland Greece. And it's very important for us to know that because it was originally founded in 1350 and is one of the oldest cities in Greece. Romans conquered it in 146 BC and they completely destroyed it. It's a common thing with the Romans. And before we go, I just want to disclose most of my notes are coming from the Worldview Bible School, so it's not me, it's them. They're very smart. I'm just stealing their notes for the day. It was later made to the capital region after Rome took over. It was rebuilt from its ruins in 46 BC by Julius Caesar. It was repopulated by a lot of veterans and freedmen of Rome. It was later made the capital region of the Achaia by Augustus Caesar. In less than 100 years, it had grown to a population of approximately 600,000. So demographics were very multicultural. A lot of Romans, a lot of Greeks, a lot of Jews, East Asians. And that's very important because when we look at Corinth, in my opinion, Corinth is kind of like the best city for us to think about the cities today that we have. It is very similar to what we go with and what we're going through. We're trying to spread the gospel. It was located near the isthmus of Corinth that connects the Peloponnese Peninsula with the mainland Greece. So you see, like right here, this little tiny piece right here. The narrow point, Christian.
No.
So this narrow point right here of the isthmus is about 4 miles wide. It's separated by the I'm saying this right, the Saronic Gulf on the east. On the west, it was the Corinthian Gulf. There's 2 harbors that are very important. I'm not going to say them. They're really hard to say. I'm going to butcher them. But you see them right there. And on the other side, there was one good harbor on the Corinthian Gulf, which again, I'm not going to say. I'm going to butcher it. I don't speak Greek. I wish I could. But again, it's a very important thing for us to realize because it's a port city. And so port cities have a lot of goods coming in, a lot of traveling, a lot of multicultural. So again, it's very similar to how we have our cities today on the east and west coast. They're very populated. The harbors at Corinth were safe, while the waters around Cape Mali down here, Malia, good catch. To the south are very dangerous. And there's a common saying the Greeks had. Let him who sails around Malia forget his home. Let him who sails around Malia make his will. So again, this is a very dangerous area to go. And so to get from this side to the other side of Greece from Peloponnese, it was smarter to just go through Corinth than it was try to go around. Okay. And so that's how it grew its wealth That's how it became a very wealthy city. How did the people handle the problem? They settled around Corinth. Very obvious. This isthmus was of great military importance in that it was the only form of line of march. So basically, if you were like fighting, you okay, Christian?
Yep.
Nope, going back.
So again, this is right here. That's what that little piece is called. It's very important because if you're trying to take over Greece, you had that small little piece. You really couldn't go around it. It was really hard. So basically, it was known as the Eye of Greece, the Bridge of the Sea, the Gate of Peloponnesus, the Bridge of Greece. You try to invade is only one way. If you try to retreat is only one way. So you better hope you had a good army that could take it over. Otherwise, you were kind of in trouble. It was a easy to get in, hard to get out situation. A lot of luxuries started coming in. Now, one of the things I want to talk about, I think it was mentioned in 1 Corinthians, was the Isthmus Games, Christian. And I kind of had it out of order. But the Isthmus Games, they're very important in this region because their main god was Poseidon, and that's what the game was for. So you'll see a lot of the Isthmus references sometimes in the Corinthian letters. I think it was played every 2 years, a lot of the similar games to the Olympics. And again, the primary god was Poseidon, was going to. It was very important. And it makes me think of modern culture, like how we have, the World Cup every 4 years. We have Olympics still today, but it's kind of different. We have World Series, all these things. Cultural cities like this have big events for the people. So you'll see Paul kind of like go into these areas. The Corinthian culture, it was very insulting to be called a Corinthian. So if someone called you a Corinthian, is bad.
What were they supposed to be called? What did they?
Well, I mean, outside of Corinth. So like if you were outside of Corinth, but you were called stingy, very insulting. To Corinthicize meant to defile.
So they just basically have a bad reputation.
It would be like being called a Yankee.
Mm.
Or like,
I would call somebody who wasn't a Corinthian a Corinthian. I thought you were talking about the Corinthians didn't want to be called Corinthians.
One of the terms that I've heard is a Corinthian woman. It's like well, it would be more like a prostitute
yeah.
Okay.
if you're a Corinthian woman.
So it's like how we call like certain regions like, oh my goodness. I've heard this before, you're a barner. You know, all the things like, yeah,
A Barner.
yeah. They call people that. But it was very insulting if you weren't from the area to be called that.
That makes sense.
They were known for being intellectually alert, materially prosperous, and morally corrupt.
Smart, rich, and
Terrible people. Well, about like the Ivy Leaguers that we have today. Same. The Corinthians were as lascivious as they were scholarly, and this tells us two things about them: that education by itself is not enough. Education not built upon God's word can be as evil as anything can be. Similar to today, we have a lot of people who are at these very prominent schools, and then you ask them certain questions, and they just have no idea. But because they have these degrees, they think they're able to tell you what to do outside of God's word.
people are book smart, but don't know like common sense.
Basically, they think hard on
They're very smart
theology, and
in
you're
certain
like,
things,
They have
but
no moral
not.
compass.
you're like, okay, but how do I fix my car?
Right, how do you apply this to our everyday life?
Precisely. How does this work on my car? I don't want to hear your philosophy. So there's that. One of the largest problems they had was prostitution, as Ryan was mentioning. The temple of Aphrodite, which was the goddess of love, was in Corinth. The temple had 1,000 female priestesses and priests who sold their favors for sex.
Oh.
Yep. Many of their sins were brought to Corinth. by the soldiers and sailors who traveled to the city. Corinth was sought out by worldly people because it was so sinful. And so this leads us to the last point, which was the problem was worldliness as well. So worldliness crept into the church in Corinth, as we'll read, and as we saw in the first epistle, proper efforts to keep the church pure had not been made. An attitude of indulgent, open mindfulness led to the toleration of immorality. So one of the things I think about was when Paul, when we were looking at 1 Corinthians, was addressing certain things like sexual morality and how they were picking and choosing. Same thing with the meats at the temples, when they were picking and choosing when to eat, sacrifice me and when not. Another one was when they were talking about their gifts, when they were talking about who was baptized, who baptized them. They were picking and choosing. That's the worldliness of being like special when they were pointing that out. So that's why it was what we see coming through. It was bad when here's some lines that they brought. It was bad when Lot moved in a house to Sodom. It was worse when Sodom moved into his house. So what does that mean? You remember what happened with Lot? Moabites and Amorites moved into his house.
Is it gonna use
No. So how did Moabites and Amorites come about? They're descendants of Lot
And his daughters.
and his daughters.
Oh, yeah.
So when Sodom went into the house, they went to Sodom, but the house of Sodom went back to them. It was good for a boat to be in water, but it was bad for a boat to have water in it. It's sinking, obviously. It's good for the church to be in Corinth, but it was bad for the worldliness of Corinth to be in the church. And that's something that we see a lot today. A lot of the world issues have crept in. Obviously, the biggest one is the LGBTQIA plus community creeping in to a lot of the denominational world. We have the Methodists freaking out, the Episcopalians freaking out, we have the Catholics kind of borderline. Everyone's dealing with this issue. It's a really sensitive issue to deal with. And so, in the past, God had a temple, but we are now the people of the temple for God. So that's something we should think about. And what challenge Corinth presented to Paul, he desired to establish a church of the Lord in one of the most wicked cities in the world. And so if he could establish a church that could stand time in Corinth, one of the wickedest cities in the world, it'd be like a conquering event, a military event in a sense, for Christ. He conquered a wicked city. And so we're about to get into the letter, so any thoughts before we move forward?
Basically, we're dealing with the same stuff we're dealing with today.
Basically. I mean, it just looks different.
Yeah, it's just-
One of the things, who I heard it from, but I say all the time now is the only thing different from the day in the past is the tools that we have. It's the only thing that's different. So we're gonna look at the letters. So this first part came from the Archaeological Bible. So it's thought that Paul went into Corinth in the early 50 AD, about 51 AD. He saw the Isthmus Games, mentioning it. I think it was also mentioned in Acts, him going there. So that's how we have the date. Paul was present for the Isthmus Games in 51 AD. The following year, he was accompanied by Aquila and Priscilla and left Corinth with the intention of returning to Antioch to the church there to make a report on the mission, his mission work. 3 years later, Paul wrote his first letter to the Corinthians, which we don't have a surviving copy. That's why, Rhett kind of made fun of it last week. If y'all heard, he said, talking about third Corinthians. We don't have the first letter that Paul wrote to them. We kind of have an idea of what maybe he was saying, like, hey, I heard y'all doing some stuff, because they get mad at him, and then he, in 1 Corinthians, basically calls them out for what they've done. That's what a lot of people think the first letter was Paul saying, hey, I've heard these things is true, and the church getting mad at him for calling them out. So he writes 1 Corinthians, what we have is a retort. Like, hey, well, you're doing this and you're doing that. I've heard this. Stop it. 1 Corinthians, if you look at it, again, it's very businesslike, very professional. He's just going through the orders of what he's heard. Like, hey, what about this dude that's like sleeping with his mother? What about this dude what about these people who are taking temple food? What about the contributions? What about this and that? So he's very businesslike in the first one. The second one, 2 Corinthians, is kind of like an informal follow-up. He's actually a little bit happy what he's heard, because he's heard that the Corinthians have started to take his words to heart, and they're actually making the changes. So he's very happy about that. Good news. When we look at Corinth, one of the things we were talking about the city structure earlier, or talking about where it's located and whatnot. Corinth was a politically Roman, socially Greek, but religiously it was Roman. So it's got this weird mixture. Again, it's a multifaceted city. Greek and East Asian. Hey, Richard.
Sorry.
No worries. Greek and East Asian all in one. So when the gospel came to Corinth, it was virtually made available to the whole world. The epistles gave us a good picture of the life problems in the first century dealing with Corinth in the congregation. They showed that fractions, division, moral carelessness, lack of relevance, abuse of their spiritual gifts. Again, this is all from the first epistle that we have. And despite the fact that the congregation was filled with faults, division was never recommended as a solution. And that's something important for us today. We see congregations, even in the church, they decided to split. Well, we can't figure this out, so we'll go over here and make our new church. But that's not something that Paul ever really encouraged. He always wanted you to reconcile. One of the things that is very important when we think about it is, I think it was the man who was committing the sexual immorality that Paul's calling out the most. In this letter that we're going to see, he repents, he fully repents, and Paul basically tells the congregation, all right, he's repenting, now reconcile, now bring him back into the fold. And that's something that's very hard for us as Christians, because the human element of us is like, he hurt me, I don't want to be around him for a good long, or I can't trust him, or how do I know he can really change?
Or what about, I told you so?
Or I told you so.
Those are the response. I mean, actually, there's an individual came up to me today,
Mm-hmm.
and this morning he's been away from the Lord,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in the foyer, not at the front. You know what I mean? And he said he's tried it his own way and it hasn't worked. And he said, this is who I am and this is where I need to be. That's what he said. And we were sitting there talking, and I said, the thing is this, you got to be careful that you don't sit there and beat yourself up, and you're not going to get an I told you so from me.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get, and you realize this is what God does for us. He gives us a choice. He gives us a choice to return.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important.
Mm-hmm. And so we're kind of getting towards the wrapping up part, kind of fast. Here are some key verses that I kind of want us to keep in our back pocket as we're looking through this. One of them is 2 Corinthians 4:3-5. We're not going to read them, but kind of got some summary of what it is. It's shine the light and teach. So remember, we're called to be a light to the world, to teach constantly. Oh, so you had a question?
Yeah,
It's like,
it's
what?
a lot of fun.
So do we have to? Second Corinthians 4:16-18. Working towards our eternal goal, so a physical goal in the sense of being the representative life, of living, trying to be that representative, or our spiritual goal, which is to basically get to heaven, which also relates to 5:1, a home in heaven. We have a place in heaven. And that's the thing that's very hard for people today, is they don't realize that time here is temporary, but outside of this, when we do pass, it's indefinite. You're either in hell or you're not. It's really scary thought to think about. You're either there forever or you're not. So we have a home in heaven, but we have to do our part. 5, verse 10, the judgment we will all face. So judgment day comes for us all. It's not just for the wicked. I get judged, Corey gets judged, Richard gets judged. I hope. I hope. Really? No, just kidding. 9, 6 through 7, how we give back to God and our attitude. So this is and some of these we'll be looking at here in a bit for our purpose, but that's very important is our attitude to giving. A lot of times we just have fallen into the old Hebrew Israel way of looking at the tithes. So it's like, oh, I have to do it, here you go. Instead of really appreciating what this is going for and how, even if it's a little bit, it's still making an impact. And 11 through 13 through 15, watch out for false teachers. And this is gonna lead into the purpose of the letter. So there's 9 purposes of the letter that the World Bible Bible School kind of brings about. And the first one is Paul wants to express the joy and encouragement that he felt at their favorable response to his previous letters. So remember, the first letter, he was very businesslike, calling them out on every little thing. And again, that's not the first letter. We don't know what the first actual letter was. It could have been him saying, hey, I've heard these things, what's going on? And they responded harshly, which is why he's like, okay, well, let me just write this down real fast to verify.
Well, it would appear it was a letter from Chloe's people
Mm-hmm.
that they're asking questions, and so he's addressing them now concerning meat sacrifice to idols.
Yeah.
You know, now concerning the things of which you wrote,
Yeah.
he says. So we know the third letter was actually from the Corinthians to Paul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm talking about the letters from like Paul himself and what he wrote. So he wrote an initial letter and there's a response and he wrote back. So it's like, well, what was that first letter that he wrote to
My understanding was the first letter was their letter to him, not his, that he didn't have a letter, but I may be wrong.
I think he was trying to get back to the Corinthians and but even before First Corinthians was written, and so they had started falling away, and so he's like, well, I'm hearing these things. He was writing back. But with the first purpose, Paul, he must have been concerned about how they were going to take the first letter. So think about that. Yeah, it's very business-like compared to 2 Corinthians. He's very much calling them out one by one on things I'm concerned, like Richard was saying. And so you don't know how someone's going to take that. So he's really happy as we see one of the purposes expressing joy in 2 Corinthians that they've taken it well. But sometimes it's not good when you hear correction. Second purpose that we'll see of the letter was to let them know about the persecution he faced while preaching in Asia. And he's letting them know not to brag or boast themselves. That was something they got in trouble with before. And he's letting them know, like, hey, I'm glad y'all are taking this in, but still, don't brag and boast. And, I went through something that was bad. Y'all are going to be going through something that's bad as well. So get prepared for that. It's not sunshine and rainbows. Next was to explain the reason for his inability to visit them. So remember, when we looked at the end of 1 Corinthians, he was saying, I'm going to make it back. But we see at the end of Acts 20 or 22, certain events came up, and he had to flee before he could make the return back to Corinth. He had to flee. I think he was in Macedonia, and then he was going to go, but he had to make it. He got trailed off in Ephesus, I believe. So things just happened. He wasn't able to make it. The fourth was to explain to them the joys, suffering, and rewards of being an apostle of the Lord and the ministry of the goal. And that's for us to remember at times, Paul, all apostleship was called into question. So he wanted to let them know what he was facing to show how much he cared for them. And that's something that we don't really realize. His apostleship was being questioned. We take it for granted, like, yeah, Paul is the apostle, but at the time, people were saying, is he really? Like, I don't trust him. I'm gonna listen to this person right here. Similar thing today would be someone teaching outside of the book, outside of scripture, like Joel Osteen, just teaching one half, the good parts, but not teaching of the negative side. So,
More like personal opinion versus facts of the Bible.
Or picking things, so, you know, I don't wanna talk about that, let's talk about
Let's
this.
talk about the feel-good stuff.
Mhm.
Makes you feel good as a Christian.
Well, and Rand, I think that in this part of 2 Corinthians is where he explains that the state of the church is proof of his apostleship.
Mhm.
Since you were a church that looks like Jesus, that's showing that I'm teaching.
Mhm.
So it does kind of show like just how personally he takes the condition of the church. If he, he's dedicated all his time and effort, but also he looks at that as like evidence of what he's been doing. So
Great point. I've never thought of that.
I think it's the point in 2 Corinthians there. I think is where he kind of mentions that. But
Yeah.
this congregation is the
Yeah.
workmanship or evidence of my apostleship or something.
Yeah, it goes,
I'm
it goes
butchering
back.
that, but he.
Well, I hadn't thought about, when he says you evidence of my apostleship, I hadn't thought about, look at the turnaround from the first letter. They actually responded, and that's great.
And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, if he could turn Corinth into a good church city, or if he can establish a church in Corinth, a good city, good conquest for him in the name of the Lord. It's kind of like a spiritual military conquest in a sense, because that's the most wicked city at the time in Greece. To express to them their responsibility to forgive the one who was guilty of sexual immorality. Mentioned the previous letter. So, I mentioned that earlier. That was a big thing. Going back to 1 Corinthians, there was a lot of people who committed immorality, and the sexual immoralities were the most obvious. A lot, adultery, considered part of sexual immorality as well. And what he's saying is that you have to show love to your brothers when they are asking for forgiveness. It's kind of your duty. Like, if they're genuinely repenting and asking for it, you all are also obliged to do your best to bring them back in. And it's going to be tough, but you have an obligation. And command them to not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. So this is something that we face today. A problem then, problem today. Times we are tempted to compromise some of our values so we don't seem bad, so we're trying to get people into the door. We'll compromise our values, we'll step back and say, okay, just so we can see if we get them in. But what happens is the more that we put our foot out like that, the more they push it out to open the door for themselves to come in. So again, the Corinthian church is the one that's most like modern church, in my opinion. The one that's going to be the most like the modern church today, or like how modern denominations are, and how most cities are. To teach the Corinthians the right attitude concerning giving, encouraging them to complete the collection for the poor at Jerusalem. So remember, we talked about this toward the end too when I talked about contributions. What happened to Jerusalem? What happened to the city of Jerusalem? A lot. There's that earthquake that was prophesied in Acts 11 that caused a lot of damage. There's so much so, I remember that one of the heads up of Egypt was even donating to the Judea region because it was so bad. That was prophesied. There's also, they were going through a lot of great persecution, difficulty and poverty. The other congregations were also keeping up. They were also contributing as well. We know a lot about the Philippian congregation, but there's thought that other congregations, other church groups were also keeping up as well. And so Corinth, the Church of Corinth, being a very wealthy congregation, can do a lot of work, and they do a lot of giving. To deal with those few individuals who continue to stand in opposition to Paul's apostleship teaching. So again, like going off what David was saying, this was a constant problem. Many still didn't believe he was an apostle of the Lord. And so they would stand against what he would say. They would Paul, Paul had to defend himself to show the Corinthians themselves, that he was not a false teacher. And then the last of the purposes of the letter was to prepare the Corinthians for his upcoming visit. And again, he wanted to come before, he wanted to several times, but things happened. The Lord had a different plan for him, had different journeys, different mission. And so he got detracted several times. But he was letting them know that he was still planning to come see them, to not give up on that. And so, one last thing before we end, I thought this was kind of interesting. This is from Kaufman Commentaries. We talked about Titus last year. We had a quick study on Titus. Luke was most likely the author of the Acts of the Apostles. Titus is mentioned 13 times in the New Testament. None of those times are in this epistle. Think about that. So we were talking, I just thought it was a kind of interesting fact that now that we always associate Timothy with Corinthians, but remember, Titus also had some work in the Corinthian city. And also Apollos had some work. It's not just one person doing all that work. It's a continuation of brothers and sisters going into the cities, helping out the congregation. And that's something that we should have today. It's not one person, like in Decatur, it's not John by himself doing the work. He's got others there to help as well. It's not just Richard here in the Deerfoot area. Got multiple people. So it's a constant work. It's not just one person. But again, with Titus, we don't hear that much. I thought it was an interesting fact that none of the times he's mentioned here, we don't associate Titus at all. So, any thoughts? All right. I know I threw a lot of things at you.
Sorry, I was late to the
Is the original schedule that was sent out a long, long time ago still?
We're
Are we on track?
Yeah, we're back on track. So, I guess we'll end with if anyone want to mention anything before we close out? Any questions about Corinthians? Richard, did you listen to the prayer?
Let's pray. Father God, we're so thankful that you've given us this opportunity to stop and to study, to be encouraged as well. Father, I'm thankful for the Second Corinthians letter, that we have the rest of the story, if in a way, and that we can see your providence play out, and we see the providence of making Paul an apostle. And Father, I pray that this will be a great study for us, that we'll be able to be sharpened and to sharpen one another. And I pray, Father, that your will be done. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
All right.
It was the other one.
You're not kidding. Hey, I'm sorry.
So, try to shine the light on.